Welcome to another Smart Career Musings, which is a gentle flurry of interesting thoughts. Today is another interesting one, which is looking at certain traits which I would consider as states, and we're going to title it as the Shadow Toolkit, how we can possibly harness some of the hidden states for sharper sensing. So quite obviously, this is another very human-faced musings today, like a lot of them. So what is it all about? Let's jump on. I'm sure that all of us face certain amount of frustrations. One thing that certainly drives me mad every time when I encounter that feature is the notion of password change that is forced upon by the bank. Well, I normally use either the State Bank of India or the HDFC, and I think in the name of safety, they force you to change a password, and that particular process is, to me, the most frustrating process. Kind of drives me mad. I'm sure all of us have favorite pieces of software that we use which we get mad with. And why are we talking about it? The fact that, I don't understand why they have to expire so frequently. They don't tell me that. And then, of course, I have to log in with my old password, give an OTP which comes, do that within 30 seconds. They have a terrible kind of a screen. They show me error messages, which I sometimes don't really appreciate and understand. They're very unforgiving if I accidentally press that CAPTCHA, which is sometimes unreadable and it's normally turned wrong. So that kind of irritation, it's a very constant irritation to me. It's like, it kind of raises my BP for the few minutes, or a minute or two, piles into a frustration, an enormous amount of discomfort. And every time it happens. And now I'm a user. When I examine and then ask, as a tester, why the hell didn't the tester feel it? Why the hell they didn't see this as a signal to make that experience a little more meaningful? And in fact, I have talked to my good friends at one of these banks. A good friend of mine is probably in charge of quality. So I told him, how can you develop such horrible piece of code? And to me that was a sense, the ability to sense make. I as a user was frustrated, and I was putting myself in the context of a tester and saying, look, I know it's irritation, but it's not noise. It's giving me some sense to help me understand why couldn't I have thought as a tester, a developer, or software engineer, to make the process not as frustrating. I understand that there is probably a safety requirement. And that's when I started kind of, in some sense, thinking, are these negative traits, vibes that we all go through, that boredom, frustration, irritation, etc., are they good qualities for a tester? And that's when it started me to think that maybe the irritation is not just noise. It was data that should be used if I was very focused on developing a great piece of code. And that's what I want to muse about, looking at 5 possible traits that is seemingly negative and how we can harness it as possibly a toolkit. That's the focus of this particular music. Typically in testing, we all go through a variety of states which are not necessarily positive, like confusion. We don't know what is happening. We don't understand what is intended. We face boredom, the constant, repetitive notion of few things, fatigue that comes along, frustration. But interestingly, sometimes these states also offer us certain profound discoveries. And therefore, it may not be true that the tools of testing are just about checklists and scripts and frameworks and so on. What if some of the most powerful tools that we possibly can use are not these, but are something else, in the states of us as a tester that we sometimes ignore? So those uncomfortable states probably is interesting because they become sophisticated diagnostic instruments. So should we suppress them, or should we recognize them and harness them? Like the boredom, the act of boredom, the seeing the repetitive stuff. Suddenly when I understand, and instead of suppressing and getting frustrated with that act of boredom, if I use that boredom to calm, to see that yes, I am bored, I am calm, I am doing nothing. Can I notice a drift? Can I notice something happening which otherwise I wouldn't have noticed? Frustration, which I'm sure all of us go through. Does it turn into a positive trait of persistence? And so on. The confusion, which is about lack of clarity. Therefore, we're probing deeper to expose the ambiguity. And these to me are possibly things like shadow states. Tools for sharper sensing. With that, let's take the normal ones. I think we all understand it. There's the typical good traits that all of us love to have. We like to have focus, we like to have discipline, we like to have curiosity, we want to be diligent about how we do, we want to be empathetic. All these are considered great traits for a tester. Not necessarily a tester, certainly a software engineer at large. And we try to develop these, right? We try to amplify these as much as possible. But on the other side, like the yin and the yang, this is the yang part of it. There are probably many more, but for purposes of this musing, these are things that I thought were probably interesting. There is a hidden layer which possibly has things that we just briefly alluded to when we started. Boredom, confusion, frustration, fatigue, maybe irritation. So now, in life, and in as philosophically put, there is this positives and the negatives, the yin and the yang, the whites and the blacks, the shadows and the brights, they all kind of coexist, and we talk about it in the sense of a harmonious balance. So if I were to apply the same kind of a yardstick to this topic of our discussion, which is about certain positive traits and certain about hidden traits or hidden layer of shadow traits, if you will, and how can I see good things in both and bad things in both. So we'll talk about the good things and the bad as far as this music is concerned. So we don't normally acknowledge these traits, but interestingly we call them unprofessional. But the interesting part, if we sharpen our awareness on this, maybe in surprising ways, they help us. And that's probably what I want to muse about. Boredom. Right? I'm sure we experience it. The mind-numbing story of redoing it, resetting up the environment, retesting stuff, doing it again and again and again. Probably numbing most often. And obviously there is frustration quietly that builds up in the background. But look at it slightly differently. If I were to just dispassionately look at the act of boredom, what are we really doing? The boredom kind of numbs me. It makes me still. It actually makes me observant. And in the process, I am very subtle. And in the stillness, I probably see the slightest ripple. A tiny delay in the transaction that is being worked. The little issue that you didn't ever watched in the UI possibly. The tiny straying data that we probably didn't see in the log before. But then, it is about recognition of this, this state of boredom. It's not obviously reacting in a negative fashion that's going to help us. It is certainly the recognition that matters. So what does boredom turn up into in a positive sense? Subtlety. The ability to notice the tiny delays in what is seemingly a stable flow. Especially that happens when probably we are attempting to validate certain things that are reasonably stable, been around for a long time. And that's one possible way of looking at it, that boredom can be transformed or can yield or can result in us being subtle because we suddenly become still and more aware. Cal Newport, in his book called Deep Work, which is a very interesting book, which I guess was probably about many years ago. I don't know how many years, but when was the book released? So if you look, I think the book was published in 2016. Okay. An interesting book and very well quoted. And the book's name is Deep Work, and it says Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World, where he makes a claim that in the current times we are horribly distracted. We do multitask, and he says, look, multitask is not a good thing. Of course, he also talks about why and what and so on and so forth. And one of those, he has a rule where he says, how do you embrace boredom? And ultimately the book kind of goes ahead and kind of looks at boredom as some bit of stillness and how we need to be positively embracing it and how it turns out to be meditative and so on and so forth. And I read the book many, many years ago, I think somewhere about, when it was launched, I guess 2016, 17 kind of stuff. But it kind of stuck on me. And of course, I've experienced that in my long endurance runs or cycling, where you are cycling for a very, very long time or running an ultra event in, let's say, in a trail where you're going round and round, and after some time it gets, you don't have anything new to look for, kind of, it gets boredom, and suddenly everything shuts down. And to me that has been a profound moment, because now I'm very subtle, I'm able to listen to my heart, I'm able to see my, muscles getting tired and so on and so forth, and after that the pain goes away. And all these traits are experiential in nature, right? So unless we experience it, you probably will not appreciate it, and I'm sure all of us go through the same stuff. So this is one part, right? One of those. Second, which I think is fairly common, confusion. When we read a spec, when we do some stuff, when somebody explains to us and somebody tells us, or the system behaves in conky ways, it causes confusion. What do they want us to do? Why is it? So confusion is very disturbing because it's serious entropy, right? And obviously it's a negative one because it disturbs you. But the flip side, confusion is probably the bedrock for good probing, to help us inquire. But certainly it's uncomfortable. But the funny part about the entire stuff is it is the discomfort that actually makes us perform most of the time better, provided we to some degree accept it. And here confusion simply means lack of clarity. So I'm not clear about what the story is supposed to be, what the spec is supposed to be, the behavior is supposed to be, etc. And it's therefore not really a weakness to accept I'm confused. I really don't know what's happening. Simply because it's invitation to probe deeper. And therefore, confusion is good if you look at it in a dispassionate way, right? But certainly at that point in time, it's not necessarily the most pleasantest thing to have, because it kind of overwhelms most of us. It just... So as much as how boredom we thought about could be interesting when you looked at it, confusion also could be an interesting a shadow trait, and we can convert that into a positive toolkit. Frustration. This, I'm quite sure, is again another one that all of us, we have annoyance when we don't understand a few things, or a bug kind of comes and goes, or seemingly some behavior is off. You're not able to quite catch it. Or if you're a programmer, you find this flaky thing that is happening and you're not able to figure out what. Programmer or scriptwriter, whatever, causes annoyance. Good? Yes, because annoyance means you persist. So frustration to a larger degree has the other one, where if we recognize it and we use it, we become more persistent. Right? I'm sure the picture here probably illustrates, mountain climbers' frustration. I'm sure you must have heard about stories or watched some videos of people who climb the north face of Yosemite. It's a vertical face, and it's one of the popular ones for some of these technical mountain climbers because it's virtually vertical. I think it's a few hundreds of feet. I don't know the distance, maybe, but it's a really tall one. It takes about a couple of hours, or maybe 2-3 hours to scale that. And there are people who scale that without any harness. So which means if you fall down, probably it's pretty fatal. And recently, I think about last week or a few days ago, not necessarily in North Face Yosemite, but a guy, a technical mountain climber, fell down 4,000 feet and he died. But people do it. People do it because it gives them adrenaline. It gives them, develop some stuff. But I'm sure, the fact that you are struggling to grip that because if you don't, you fall down. So that's annoyance. Happens the same way more recently that I experienced in a ride where it was a long 600-kilometer ride on a flat surface on a hot day, on a wet night. So nights were wet and the days were hot, and this was in the state of Tamil Nadu. It was a 600-kilometer non-stop ride. It's frustrating because it's flat and you just have to keep on pedaling. And you can't stop simply because it's flat. And so what happens? So you ask yourself, why the heck am I doing this? But then you're signed up for that event, you're doing it, right? And that slowly converts it, because it's a point of no return. You can't do anything because you're in the middle of nowhere. You can't just say, oh, I'm bored, I'm frustrated, let me stop. Well, you still have to go a long ways to find a bus to get back home. It turns into persistence. And then what do? You pedal much faster. You forget about all the pain. And then you suddenly see that you're covering 30-35 kilometers an hour, which is damn good. And that annoyance, it actually fuels the grit. Right? It pushes back, pushes in. And much like what we do in other elements, if you convert the same thread in the context of the work that we do, maybe in the act of validation that we do, maybe, we're persisting to find that flaky issue or elusive script or, and stuff. It probably adds value to what we do. So another interesting trait, right? But all these require just acceptance of it. That's the key trick, and that's how it becomes a toolkit. Otherwise, it becomes a negative vibe. Let's move on to the next one, which we talk about from the fatigue. We talked about 5 of them. This is the 4th one. Fatigue. So we are tired. We're just doing too many things. We just tired. That's it. So what do? Nothing. You just continue on, isn't it? But why are we talking about this? Because we talk about stress tests and other tests, etc. from a product standpoint. Fatigue is the same thing from the human standpoint. It's what people and users experience after a long day. So fatigue mirrors the reality of users who aren't probably fresh or alert or patient. And so, if as a test person, if I see the fatigue as reflecting an end user's feeling at that point in time, then maybe I will become a little more empathetic and hopefully understand what it means to be at that particular state. Because software quality is not about the quality of the software, it is the experience of the human with the software. So it's a relationship between both the system on one side and the human on the other side. So we can stress all we want the system, but it's equally important to kind of stress the human and see how they react to a system. So, meaning, what we're really saying is, look, if something causes fatigue, maybe the forms the information that is shown is too clunky, it is filled up, too many things on the screen. And I'm sure some of us, when we work with some of the softwares that we see in India here, where you have 10 ads running on the side, you got some screens that are up there. It is now telling you that I will log you off in a few seconds if you don't do anything. It is just fundamental irritation. And it causes me mentally to shut it down. Why didn't they think of that particular state and therefore do a better job? That's what we're talking about here. So it, in a way, reveals designs that are there in the software that probably demand too much of energy, and therefore fatigue, oddly enough, helps us test for real life situations. So if as a person I'm trying to validate something when I'm doing this stuff, and if I do feel fatigue and I'm struggling to do a particular job, then it's an indication that maybe it's an opportunity for an improvement on how we can change this experience, right? Let me come to the last one. Irritation. Irritation is very visceral, very deep down. Something that just explodes most of the time. It's a very visceral feedback, right? Like the lady on the screen. She's just frustrated. She probably would, so much of irritation that it looks like she's going to break the computer up there. The act of making an operation very difficult. What could be deemed pretty simple is forcibly made more complex, for example. And it causes a lot of irritation to the user. So what are we talking about here? We're saying, if I feel that irritation and if I'm empathetic to it, then I should say, I am the guy who's feeling irritation, is a guy who's going to probably, at this point in time, building or validating. The same would be reflected as the user too. And therefore, can I seek more insight by putting the filter, by looking at irritation as an empathetic lens? And therefore the sense, why is this so hard, is empathy in disguise. Obviously points to fundamental design gaps. And the irritation comes from many things. It may come from messages that don't tell you, actions that seem stupid, or actions that seem making you think that you're doing something wrong, but actually you think you're doing right, and you don't know what's happening. And then and when you feel that, it simply means that it's probably an insight, and what we're really saying is empathy. So what we kind of mused about a little bit is to look at some of the traits, some of the states, if you will, not even traits, states, which are kind of what we call a shadow states, right? And they're asking, if I get into this state, is it a flaw? Is it bad? Should I shun it? Should I avoid it? And the sad part is, you can't avoid it. It's going to happen. And therefore, the question that one can ask is it a flaw? And maybe the answer is, maybe not. If I eliminate myself, maybe they're not. They're instruments. They're instruments where boredom expands my vision. My confusion sparks an inquiry. Frustration fuels a persistence, and fatigue maybe reflects real use pain. And irritation exposes possibly pain points. Much like the stuff that you see, they're all kind of tools, like the mirror, like the compass for direction, the light to illuminate, and the magnifying glass to see more, see better. Tools for sharper sensing. And therefore, the real question is not whether we feel these states. We will. All of us go through, and many more of these states. But do we recognize them as data? do we recognize them as data for sharper sensing? And therefore, in essence, what we are really saying is, yeah, there are certain positive traits, like what we initially started off with. They provide a well-formed structure. They help you to focus, they help you to be disciplined and curious and diligent and empathy and so on and so forth. They are all very nice things to have, very positive. They provide a well-formed structure. And the question gets asked, right, is structure enough? Is it good enough? And then the yang comes in, the yin is on the bright side. And these shadow states, if I can recognize them, they sharpen my sensing. So it is important to have the structure, and it's important to constantly sharpen it with some of those states that we encounter, what we talked about, the boredom, the confusion, the frustration, the fatigue, and so on. And so, just like how the positives, the negatives, the yin and the yang, taken together, the larger context of assurance becomes alive. We adapt better. We become more human. Right? And that's interesting in that sense. So, maybe the shadow states are not as bad as all. They are probably interesting. And in summary, what we talked about is boredom probably allows us to expand, gives us a better vision because it allows us to be more subtle. The stillness reveals the drift and the fragility. Whereas the second of confusion, which is sparks an inquiry, helping us to probe better, asking sharper questions, open questions, whatever. The frustration results, if I recognize it, into persistence. It fuels the hunt for maybe certain root causes, stuff like those. The fatigue, which is really a reflection of saying, hey, that's a reality check. It mirrors real world use. And finally, of course, the irritation, which hopefully gives me insight from an empathetic standpoint. The discomfort highlights the hidden user pains. So this is what I wanted to kind of share with you, because there are quite a few softwares. I, as an end user, I'm sure, much like what you might have experienced, I go through and I always wonder, what is so hard about it? Why do people design such horrible ones? And some of them are easy to fix. So some of the government sites that we encountered, some of the stuff that we do, let's say, from banking and stuff, the older ones, they are sometimes so frustrating. And I always wonder, why didn't they do it? Couldn't they have felt it? Did they just completely forget about it? And I don't know. So I thought I'd convert that into musings, and that's where it is today. So thank you so much.